Good evening, good afternoon, and good day from wherever you are joining us today. My name is Jenny Frankel, Associate Director at the Museum of Public Relations. I am so pleased to welcome our fellow professionals and students who have tuned in tonight. We are privileged to have you join us for this historic event, the first ever program to pay tribute to our Indigenous colleagues working in public relations, media, and communications, and the contributions they've made to their communities, to our culture, and to the field of communications. Our panelists tonight hail from throughout North America, from Milwaukee to Anchorage, from Phoenix to Calgary, representing a dozen different tribes from across the US and Canada, and a vast array of communication specialties. Before I introduce our wonderful MC for the evening, I'd like to thank our amazing sponsors who made tonight's presentation possible. A huge thanks to Enbridge, the Bonnie Ablon Foundation, the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications, Department of Advertising and Public Relations at the University of Georgia, Badger PR, the PR Council, Page, the Diversity Action Alliance, the Stevens Group, THG, the Hannon Group, PRCA, the Public Relations and Communications Association, Tony Musi Falcone, Joyful Planet, or Patrice Tanaka, Compro, California State University at Fullerton, Steve Lilienthal, and Muckrack. Thank you so much for sponsoring this event and for making it all possible. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our MC and moderator for this evening, Catherine Hernandez-Blades, who is a Senior Vice President of Communications at SAIC, one of the nation's top defense companies. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much. It is such an honor and privilege to be here. And thank you for all of your hard work and all of your effort in putting this amazing program together. And it's going to be amazing. I also would be remiss if I didn't thank Shelley and Barry Spector, their tireless, unwavering commitment and dedication to our profession and to preserving and protecting and growing what the very best of who we are is just inspiring. And I thank them both for allowing me to be a small part of this very important discussion today. Again, thank you to our sponsors and welcome. We have over 200 people registered for this event. And that is an incredible achievement. So welcome to our inaugural celebration of Native American history, PR, communications, marketing, and media practitioners. And again, it is such an honor for me to be here. And it is a very special day for so many reasons. We would be remiss if we didn't honor and pay tribute to our veterans. I have to be honest with you, this is always a special day, and not just because I've spent half of my career in aerospace and defense, but because of my family connections. And it is particularly relevant that we're doing this on Veterans Day, this event for the PR Museum, because I don't know how many of you realize this, but Native Americans have the highest per capita involvement of any population to serve in the US military. And that included my grandfather, Lotus Lake Mann, who won the Bronze Star in World War II, or was the recipient of a Bronze Star in World War II as a member of the US Army. So to all of our veterans out there, thank you so much for your service. Nothing short of heroic. And I'm very proud to see Native American representation so high as we advance all of the important causes of our nation. So thank you very much. And speaking of advancing important causes, I now have the distinct privilege of introducing our keynote speaker for tonight. And what an amazing man. What an incredible story. His bio does not do him justice, but I want to just pull a small part of his bio to share with all of you as I introduce Mark Troyhant. Gosh, let's talk about Indian Country Today. This is a digital site that literally disappeared in 2017, completely went defunct. And because of this man's vision and drive and desire to do all of the right things, in 2018, with a budget of $350,000 and 3 people, he brought this site back to life in 2018. Now think of all of the things that we've been through since 2018, a global pandemic, elections, absolutely unprecedented times for the entire world. And yet 2018, $350,000, 3 people, defunct website. And he has made this media company an event that is today in 2021, worth over $2 million with a staff of 20. And frankly, even more important than the financial numbers and the number of people employed, what's even more impressive is that he reaches 500,000 people each and every month. Absolutely incredible. So it's now, again, my pleasure to introduce to you Mark. Mark, would you please come off camera and open your mic? Welcome, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Catherine. That's wonderful. I appreciate it. And I also do want to mention just a note about Veterans Day as well. A little history that might be new to some folks is that Veterans Day was originally Armistice Day, and it was to commemorate the end of World War I. And that's particularly significant because, as Catherine mentioned, Native Americans have a high participation per capita in the military. And in World War I, when soldiers returned from Europe, they were not United States citizens. The first Citizenship Act was passed in 1924, so several years after that. And so the first generation of American Indian and Alaska Native warriors that fought at least in World War I, did so without being US citizens. I love telling the story of Indian Country Today. Thank you so much for having me a part of this. I really grew up and kind of went back and forth between mainstream journalism and tribal journalism. I started working at my own tribal newspaper, the Shobat News, and I know you'll hear from Randy L. Teton a little later, when I was still a teenager. And I like to joke that I keep looking for a job because I've never found a real one yet. In 2018, Indian Country Today was dark. And I know every journalist I know always thinks about, wow, if I could just run the place, there are things I would do different. And to actually have the keys handed to you and say, okay, how would you do things differently? And from the beginning, we decided we were going to do this venture in a really dramatic way from a lot of other ventures. The first thing we did, I think it was probably the most important decision, is we decided that our only focus was going to be on the mobile device, and everything else was irrelevant. So our website can look pretty. If we do print, that can be nice, but our primary focus had to be the cell phone. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how that worked out a little later on. We also knew that we needed to be a nonprofit. And I thought, if you're going to be a nonprofit, why do you want to have subscriptions and other things that basically slow you down? So we decided from the very beginning, we're going to be free. And when we mean free, we really mean free. Not only can readers access all of our content for free, but other news organizations can take our content for free. And we encourage that. In fact, right now, today, I'm excited to see on the front page of the Washington Post webpage is our story on Crow veterans and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So it's a good example of how that works. I was hired, and I remember one of the first things we decided to do after mobile was we wanted to build up kind of slow. So the first year we raised money, and 2 foundations came in almost immediately. As Catherine mentioned, we raised about $370,000 the first year. We did continue to sell advertising and do the things that other news organizations did. But we wanted to figure out a way to expand that, to make it so that folks could build on that rather than just make it a cost. Part of that meant having a relentless focus on what people were reading. One of the things we wanted to do differently, and this one took a lot of training because a lot of folks on staff hated this, to tell you the truth. And that is, we wanted to get away from chasing stories just because they were hot on the web. And you think about building an audience, and the easiest way to do it is to follow stories that would be considered clickbait. And we just didn't want to do that. So I labeled those stories as outrage of the week. And we just either write one paragraph about them or pass on them. What we wanted to do instead was provide substance. We wanted to have stories that people would remember. If those could be stories that have some depth or some research or something that really lifted them up and be aspirational as much as anything. I really like talking to, well, let me finish the story, but then I'll shift to public relations. Our growth from the very beginning was phenomenal. We launched in June of 2019, and the readership numbers started to just trickle up, and we're pretty steady growth. In fact, the numbers that Catherine read at the beginning are actually have been changed today. We're users of Chartbeat, so we measure everything. And one of the things that this last 2 months, we're now passing 1.5 million page views a month and up around 750,000 unique users. But more important than that, if you drill down and look at that readership, our number one demographic is 25 to 34. And that's been true pretty much from where we started. And I think it goes back to the idea of using the cell phone as your metric. If that's where your delivery vehicle is, that's where young people are, and that's where they're going to be reading. And that's been, like I said, consistent. There are some cool things that are worth knowing in that regard. First of all, and I know whether in PR or news, you've probably heard a lot, write short, write short, write short. On the cell phone, that doesn't matter. And people will ask, and it drives reporters crazy sometimes, how long a story should be. And now every editor here answers the same way, and that is, what do you need to tell the story? So we had one story that was 13,000 words, and it had an average read time of 13 minutes. And that's the great thing about data, is you can actually follow how a story is being read and where it goes. And one of the things that's really interesting, and again, this is how the mobile phone has made things differently, is that people will read part of a story, they'll put it down, then they may get in a long line and they'll start reading it again. And they might be in the line again somewhere else and they'll read some more. It may take 2 days to read the whole story, but we can actually measure how people read a story in bits until they get to the end, which is fascinating to me. One of the things that I'm most excited about our readership is our support from individual donors. I budgeted this year $200,000, and last year we worked really hard to get $100,000. So we actually made it a stretch goal of doubling. And even though the year's not ending yet, we are doing a calendar year, we're going to exceed that by about $30,000 this year. And what's really remarkable, and this just brings a lot to my heart, is that most of the donations come in as $30, $25, $15. Our average donation is $35. And one of the things that particularly is nice about that is you'll see people with money orders. So that means not only did they take the time to support this news media, but they went to the post office and paid for a money order and mailed it to us. And that's really touching to me. Well, we were kicking along about 2 years ago. Things were going well. We were building up our staff. We had reached to the point where there was 4. And then the election of 2018 came, and we thought, you know, this is going to be a pretty extraordinary election. And we could see some really amazing candidates on the horizon. And so I thought, and this is 5 weeks before the election, what if we were able to produce a broadcast election night similar to CNN or MSNBC, and go on the air. We had no staff for this, and we actually had no budget for this, and started calling around looking for partners. And pretty soon we had partners, and we had folks who signed up to do that. We went on the air for 5 hours on election night in 2018, and it was an extraordinary success. We had great, a lot of people did it as watch parties on Facebook and some other places. And almost immediately the staff started to say, what can we do next? This is fantastic. And we started to think, well, maybe we could produce a weekly, well, at that point, a daily TV show. And I remember, again, calling for partners and looking around, and one of those was Washington State University, or I'm sorry, Arizona State University. And the dean at the time said, I don't think you can afford a weekly or daily, but why don't you try a weekly? And why don't you move here? And we were based in DC at the time, so we picked up and moved to Arizona. We're now located at ASU. And we began planning for a weekly magazine type news show. Well, then the pandemic hit, and we started doing reporter roundtables on Facebook. And again, we started to see this incredible audience. People were really hungry for the information. And so pretty soon, a station, FNX in Southern California, a network, said, well, why don't you make your show 2646 and we'll carry it on PBS. And we did that. And since then, it's been a little more than a year. We're now in 30 markets and growing. January 1st, we're rebranding the show as ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez. So we have a young anchor who's ready to take us to the next generation. And it's been an incredible opportunity to show that this is something that can be done, that there's an opportunity to create a show out of scratch, find an audience and deliver it. Catherine mentioned our hiring, and our hiring binge is not over. We've been talking to some major funders about next year, and particularly the television show. And we think we need to double the staff in the next year or two to around 40 employees or 45. And we're particularly looking for producers. So if you know folks that are interested in that career path, there's a wonderful opportunity ahead. I don't want to run out of time, so I want to shift gears and talk about public relations. And I've always think that public relations and journalism have a great relationship where they work at the best of times hand in hand. There are always times of contention, but most of the time it's working hand in hand. I remember when I was editor of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer or editorial page, like a lot of editorial pages, I started to measure op-eds and noticed that men were 70% and thought, wow, this is something you can change tomorrow. So we started measuring bylines and set the goal of 50-50 immediately. And it took the PR professionals who work on op-eds about 3 weeks to figure out that they had a much higher placement rate if they submitted an op-ed from a female writer than a male. And some never got it. That's something that's so extraordinary to me, that they'd still pitch the same old folks. But that's a really good example of working hand in hand with PR. One of the first things that happened when I got to ICT was I noticed how many press releases we threw away. And I know you all work hard, and there's a reason why you do press releases. You're trying to get the word out. A lot of the times a press release will come in on something that we just don't have time to do. Press releases are really well done. I mean, they have a lot of information into them. So I thought, what if we had a channel? We're digital, we can do anything we want. What if we had a channel that published just press releases? And we call ours the Press Pool, and it's an open channel. We have a full-time editor whose only job is to post press releases. And it's amazing. Sometimes the readership on that page will be higher than our news pages, not often, but it does happen. And it shows that there's a tremendous interest in that information. We're happy to look at those, so you might tell your clients about it. The second area that I think often is missed in PR world that would be a great benefit to your clients is op-eds. Again, op-eds, we want a wide variety of op-eds. We try to post as many as we can. Right now we have a half-time editor, but our goal is to move up to a full-time op-ed editor whose only job again is to print op-eds. Ideally, I would like to see us do a range of 4 or 5 a day. again, the web is such an open, in fact, our metaphor we use a lot came from 1828 and an editor by the name of Elias Budnot, who was the editor of the Cherokee Phoenix. And he called the news media back then a spacious channel. And if it was a spacious channel in 1828, it really is one now. And so there are a lot of ways to do that. The third thing, opportunity-wise for PR, that I would love to have your input on is we're always booking guests. Right now, our PBS show is pretty well formatted with one major guest and one minor guest and a news block. But in our plans, we've been thinking we want more packages to break it down a little more. And then we'd also want shorter guest packages. So if you have a guest that has something worth 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to get to a national audience, I would certainly pitch our producers. And we can help you get all the addresses and stuff through the association, through the museum on who to contact for that sort of thing. We have reached a new stage in our development, and that is now it's as a large media company, have to spend a lot of time on fundraising. But even there, I'm surprised how well it's going. Again, we started with those first 2 grants of about $370,000. And this year we're going to top $2.5 million, and we're on track next year for $4 million. So it's been a steady increase, and Foundation World has been really wonderful. It's interesting, and I think this is what I want to end on because I see it's 6:22. But there is a story about the media and a narrative of decline. And that story is told so often that people think that's the only story out there. And for us, it's just not true. We are a media that's interested in innovating. We're a media that's interested in hiring people and looking for ways to expand and to grow our reach. And we do that for a variety of ways to create, again, this spacious channel. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark, so much. Before we let you go, just a couple of questions. What advice would you give to the students listening to this broadcast in regard to their future careers?
I think follow your passion. So if you're in a marketing and PR track, you don't have to get out of that. We're hiring marketing and PR people too. In fact, one of our interns this semester is a marketing person. Find out what you like to do and focus on that, because then you're never working at any time in your life. And that's how it's been for me. You find something you love to do and everything else takes care of itself.
What a wonderful note to end on. Please join me. Thank you so much to Mark Trahant for sharing your passion with us and your wisdom. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to ask our panelists for panel 1 to come on camera and off of mute. That would be Angela, Simon, Brandon, and Randiel. Oh, it's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I have to tell you, I am truly excited to tackle this topic. I think it's so important, so timely, and so relevant. And when we talk about myths and representation, there is so much to unpack here, so much to unpack that actually matters. And so thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to ask all of you to introduce yourselves. And when you do, would you share something with the audience that actually isn't on your bio? And I'll start with Simon.
Hi, everybody. Simon Amachiapolo, Nama Lakota, Naspayola, Le Iuha Uwipiki Washtayolo. I'm gonna forgive me for speaking the foreign language English going forward. When we do these things as Indigenous people, we also want to have land acknowledgement. I'm currently in Denver, Colorado, and that is Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute territory. So wherever we're at, we have to acknowledge who the original peoples and whose lands we're on. So I'm a citizen of the Oglala Lakota Nation. I'm also Chicano. I teach Indigenous Studies at the University of Colorado. I'm also a journalist with NBC, Photos, Travel, and Lonely Planet, among others. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Simon. Angela.
Sanazoon, everyone. I'm Angela Gonzalez. Flada Dathna is my Danaka name. That's the language of the Koyukon Athabascan people. And I live and work on Denaina land in Anchorage, Alaska. And I guess one thing would be that I was Miss Indian University of Tulsa in Oklahoma.
I love that. Thank you, Angela. Randiel.
Good afternoon. My name is Randiel Teton, and I serve as the Public Affairs Manager for the Shoshone-Bannock Tribes, and I'm actually on our homeland. So thank you, Simon, for acknowledging that. I think something that's not included in my bio is that my face is on United States currency.
That is pretty impressive. I think that is a first. And this is the Sacagawea coin, correct?
Yes.
Bravo, bravo. Thank you for sharing that. Brandon.
Hello, my name is Brandon Scott, Cherokee Nation. I'm here in Oklahoma. I'm the Director of Communications for Cherokee Nation businesses. And a fact about me, everything pretty much revolves around the fact that I have twin 9-year-old daughters. So I don't know what else is amazing about me, but that seems to be a pretty amazing aspect of my life.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. So let's just dive right in. And I'm going to use air quotes in this question. When we talk about the history of Native Americans, there's so much inaccuracy that has been perpetuated by decades of Hollywood drama, by advertising. Don't get me started on professional sports teams. And even in the textbooks that students study in America about Native American history is so wrong. So how do we correct it? How do we get the narrative back, and how do we own it? And I'll start with gentleman first, Brandon.
I mean, for me, all those things do perpetuate those stereotypes, but also, I mean, that's in everyday society. We've also, one of the big things that we worry about now is state government, federal government. There are, misconceptions that are on social media. They're put out in press releases, and it all usually goes to serve whoever is shouting those words the loudest. I know right now in Oklahoma, we're involved in a multitude of court cases. There was the McGirt case, which you may have heard of. It went through the Supreme Court. Our own governor, our own state government, local district attorneys are all putting out information that is, for lack of a better word, just false. And it serves them well to have that narrative out there. But it's kind of my job and people like me to serve as the first line of defense, and to just kind of hold our hand up and say, that's incorrect. Here is the correct information, or even better yet, here is where you can go to find that correct information with your own eyes. So it doesn't become a tit for tat, but all those other stereotypes and misconceptions. I mean, I like to think that I'm myself, as well as everyone on this panel, is living proof of that those stereotypes they don't exist. I see the headdress stereotype pops up a lot, and most tribes in Oklahoma, nobody incorporates a headdress. It's not even a part of their culture. Unfortunately, all of us, especially everyone on this panel, all of our cultures are different, but we tend to get lumped into the same group, that Native American group. But even though our cultures are different, I can guarantee you everyone on this panel we have some similar experiences. We've all gone through some of the same things and faced some of the same adversity. So I know we've all got that commonality, but that's that's the first thing is I speak up, and I speak loudly, and I don't back down whenever I'm faced with somebody that says, well, no, my grandma told me, or I saw this on CNN or Fox News or wherever. And I'm like, well, you're talking to somebody right now. So listen. So.
Well put, well put. And keeping with the theme of gentlemen first on the first question, Simon, your thoughts?
Well, first things first, I see Enbridge is sponsoring this, and I'm just going to say it outright, stop line 3. Didn't know that they were sponsoring, but that needs to stop, right? You can't honor and pay tribute to Indigenous people while you're actively harming the people, the land, and their way of life. So stop line 3. You can't be the greatest world or greatest country if you're guilty of a genocide. It's really hard for this country to face what they've done and are continuing to do to Indigenous people. We're in November, right? And the majority of people still don't know the true history of Thanksgiving. Native American Heritage Day falls on Black Friday, which is bullshit. But unfortunately, you know, we are so canceled out of the conversation that people don't even know where to begin, right? They're still calling us Native Americans or American Indians when we're Indigenous peoples. So it's really hard for a lot of people to focus or at least pay attention to the true history, right? And I mean, again, a lot of people don't know that Hitler was inspired by the Indian prison camp system, right? And that predates, you know, World War II and Auschwitz, et cetera, by 70, 80 years. These are hard truths for the United States to shine a light on. It's the skeleton in the closet. So when we're called PC, you're not going to get anything more PC than an American history textbook. That excludes us and it leaves out what it did. In South Dakota, the governor wants to push what's called patriotic history. They're worried that all of this information about what they've done will raise people like Indigenous people or otherwise who are educated and know what this country is capable of doing and continues to do. It's a lot of people it's a lot to unlearn for a lot of people. But, you know, usually in my classes, I'll tell my students on the first day, everything you think you know about Indigenous people, drop it and start over. Because how do you winnow out so many lies and all the bullshit in that American narrative, the myth-made American narrative?
So Randiel, you tell us, how would you go about tearing down the myths?
So I come from a household where my mother was a tribal director for our tribal museum for 10 years. And we actually always, well, what I felt or that has always worked is actually owning the narrative and being able to educate them why we wear war bonnets and what it symbolizes. I come from a public school district where I went to school. Variety of different nationalities inside the classroom, definitely textbooks that I did not agree with, going home and asking my grandparents who are fluent speakers about the information that was provided, and just always, you know, asking questions. But, you know, it's now as an adult and a mother of 3 children, I feel that it has been important to engage with the classrooms, engage with the school districts, hire and include Native Americans in the school boards. It seems like that's one thing that has been working so far, where we're actually part of the discussion instead of being part of the topics and not having a say about how to structure the right education. So
Thank you so much, Angela.
sorry about that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to make sure you had finished your thought. And
Yeah, along the same lines, get more Native people in PR roles and in Native media roles, support Native media. Mark mentioned how we can individually support Indian Country Today. We really need to put our support behind those things that help us to get the story and truth out. And sometimes I feel like that there's the trend on TikTok now that's like, fine, I'll do it myself, you know. So one way that I do it is by, like I have my Athabascan Woman blog where it kind of started in, like, you know how we do bios, like, oh, Catherine just joined Museum of PR, you know, and then we give you a bio. And then I was like, I could do that for Native people. And so I started interviewing Native people, and it just to counter the narrative, the misinformation that's out there about Alaska Native people. And like Brandon said, or maybe it was Simon, sorry, that were so many diverse people, even Alaska Natives, they get dumped into one, maybe description, but we're very diverse. And the state is, if you lay Alaska out onto the United States, you can see how big the state is. And that's very diverse. We live very differently. The coastal people live very differently than the interior people. But yeah, overall, put more Native voices in there, put more Native students in places where they can share. And I'll say one more thing. Oftentimes I will get asked to edit writing books and articles and stuff like that, and see if they are culturally appropriate. And so, but why not invest in Native writers who will, they don't have that, they don't have to pay someone to do that, because they know. So we know we can do things the right way the first time.
I like that. Do things the right way the first time. So let's talk about some things that kind of aren't being done right. To pull that thread, demographics. So as we look at the pandemic, somehow this population is consigned to other. When we talk about missing and kidnapped women, there isn't the focus on it, even though it disproportionately impacts Indigenous women. There isn't the focus on it that there is on other demographics. How do we combat this? Not part of the police brutality conversation. All of these social issues seem to be relegated to the small other in demographic. How does that change? And I'll start with Simon this time.
It's really difficult since I'm in mainstream news. I don't know if a lot of people are aware that the most male, most white industry in the United States is journalism. And it happens to be, and it makes it really difficult to get those types of stories out there, right? I don't know how many times with my editor, I had to bribe them with a cup of coffee or lunch just to get a story out. But that's mainstream, that's not alternative media, right? But it's also about sharing the information as much as you can. It's not, you can tweet something out there, but it's also a lot of the information about murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, two-spirits, and relatives is kind of like people go acknowledge it, but then they won't share it. So that's why as Indigenous people, there's a lot of media making happening on our own side. So YouTube channels, TikTok channels, Twitter, etc. So that's kind of how Standing Rock happened, right? Everybody came out with us at Standing Rock, like the New York Times and CNN, etc., because we raised our voices. So it really is about elevating Indigenous voices. It's about passing the mic. It's about including Indigenous people in that diversity list and not just breezing by it, just like we mentioned, or like you mentioned with CNN, it went Black, Latino, Asian, and then they called us something else. And that is indicative of how mainstream, not just journalism or media, but America sees this country. They see it that way. And we're kind of like that out of sight, out of mind, even though we're at the top and bottom of most social statistics, right? So it is about, elevating Indigenous voices so that we have those spaces to tell these stories, because we can't rely on somebody who says, I'm a quarter Cherokee just to get a job to share stories about murdered and missing Indigenous women.
Angela, same question.
One thing that comes to mind is, how, well, maybe you don't know, I'm not sure, but we have this thing where Native people, they're proud of who they are, where they come from, and we're unapologetic about it. So I'm unapologetically Native or unapologetically Koyukon Athabascan, I am who I am, this is who I am. And so I want to transfer that and say we need some unapologetic allies, people who are stepping up and elevating Native voices. And like there's a joke, we Ruffaloed it. That's Mark Ruffalo, how he really elevates Native voices and stories. We need more people like that. And that's just one small thing to do, but I'd love to hear from others.
That's great. And Brandon, same question. And what does good allyship look like?
I mean, I'll mirror what Simon says. I try to, a lot of times allies don't just pop up and say, hey, I'm here to help. You've almost got to kind of go out there and gather them, even create them at times. I've had lifelong friends that have come up to me and asked me some of what I would have considered the most ignorant questions that I've ever, just left me flabbergasted, like, hey, I heard, natives don't pay income tax, or you guys get free car tags, or you guys all get your college paid for. And I'm like, well, I had student loans that I'm working on. And last time I checked, Uncle Sam's still taking a nice chunk of my paycheck. So a lot of that, it comes through education. And with what Simon said about the journalists, in PR, I get contacted by journalists daily. I get questions. I get, sometimes they'll just state the misconception, and then I try to correct. Also, in a previous role, I was the editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, and I worked closely with the Native American Journalists Association, and they had a whole list of, things that to educate journalists, and especially non-Native journalists, to steer them in the direction where they got the stories right. I steer journalists toward their website. I try to correct their misconceptions, even if they might ask me about another tribe that's local, and I'll steer them to the correct people to ask those questions to, instead of just giving them a broad answer or shutting them down and saying, that's an ignorant question, or that I try to educate and then steer them to the correct information. We've got a big issue in this country, and it mirrors what's going on in just the regular real world. Is with natives, is there is a machine that is dividing people, and it always feels like it's the top, whether you want to call it the 1% or the people in power. They usually grab these groups, we'll call them have-nots, and they usually pit them against other have-nots. And that often happens with natives. It feels like you'll take a group of people that we're going through the same stuff as them, but the government comes along and says, you should be angry with these people because they're trying to take something from you, or they want to change your way of life. And so they pit these two groups against each other, and then those misconceptions live in that world. And it makes sense for those people to say, this is why I'm mad, because natives get something that I don't, when in reality, those things just aren't true. And we should be on the same side and upset that both those groups don't have those things. It's a really hard question to answer. Like, what can we do to fix all those things? It's the $1 million question. I wish I knew. All I know to do is educate, correct, and try to move forward.
Well, education is key, as is moving forward with knowledge and information. Randiel, so your thoughts on myth busting?
Well, it's starting with having anything that you do with an indigenous approach, and working for my tribal government for over the past 11 years, being from the reservation, understanding the culture, our language, our history, and then just being that face at the state level and the federal level is so key. One thing that we've been working on towards getting our story correct and even telling our story is pushing towards having someone, a representative at the state level, so we have someone to work with. And public relations is the key to building that relationship with our state officials, even with our county officials, you know, because one of the reasons, you know, PR offices has been so helpful with our tribal government is because of just having someone be able to, like Brandon said, being able to educate them, to correct them. A lot of times these individuals is getting the information from their household, which is their grandparents that may have had some type of misinformation or stereotypes about the reservation. Maybe they had a bad experience with the reservation people. I get a lot of that, and the new generation, because of social media, they're reaching out. They have friends in their classroom. They're not afraid to ask no more, and that's the good thing. And I definitely encourage, you know, professors, you know, people that are here on this chat, this webinar, if you guys are teaching the students, please look at the local tribal government websites. You're going to get all the correct information there. So I just wanted to say that it's really important for representation, a tribal face that understands the tribe's issues.
Absolutely. And a shout out to UT Austin. I understand we have a professor with several of his students in attendance, and that's the first step, right? Education, information, accuracy. And it hopefully will result in combating bad behavior. So let's talk about bad behavior for a minute and negative stereotypes. Congratulations to the Atlanta Braves on winning the World Series. However, it's 2021. That tomahawk chop thing is so offensive. If you look at what happened with the Washington football team and an example of how sponsors can engage and get things done, your thoughts on what else it's going to take? And I'll start ladies first this time. Angela, what's it going to take to get rid of the nonsense and the noise and just the bad behavior?
I think we need to take some longer term steps, like thinking beyond just this combating this one problem, you know, changing the name. It just seems like we have to continually fight for that. Like, let's do something bigger. Like, okay, this is not working. This didn't work for them. Let's make it like a federal law or something, you know. So we need change that's like totally across the board. I think that instead of Native people having to continually fight and educate pretty tirelessly and freely, and then, you know, Randy mentioned those resources. It's there. It's right at our fingertips. People, come on, we can do better.
Yeah, do better. Randiel, your thoughts?
I actually had some direct exposure and experience with this the past 2 years. I'm proud to announce that our office, our tribe, actually had 3 Idaho schools, public schools, change their mascots, which has been amazing. That's never happened in history, in Idaho history, where we actually had the mascot changes. But what it started out with is a phone call saying that it is wrong for that mascot and why, a letter from the tribal council, and then arranging a meeting between the superintendent and the school board, inviting them to the reservation to meet with the leaders to have a discussion, a friendly one-on-one discussion on why their mascot is hurtful, and then going to the district and working at the school board level of being able to have that discussion with the community. I've actually attended some of these school board meetings, and some of them are really tough. And they're after school, so I had to take my little one with me. And it was scary at one of them where, you know, people were very threatened that we were trying to take away their history of being named the Braves, the Redskins. It really was ridiculous, because we as the people from this area, you know, we had to inform them that it's not okay. It's not okay that you are trying to depict and be proud of something that the history is not there. There was no tribal people in those schools. These are predominantly all white schools, but they were very proud to be the Redskins, and they were doing the exact same thing at the Atlanta Braves game, the chop. So just having that conversation and letting them know that it's not okay and why. And again, it's about making that connection and showing up and showing face. We brought our elders, we brought our language and culture department, we had our tribal leaders there. So all the right people were in the room to have those questions answered. So again, it's all about making the connection, making the change, sticking to it. And now we have schools from Washington State reaching out to our tribal office asking, how can you help our school make those changes? So it's starting the domino effect. And that, I think, is making baby steps to something bigger and better.
That is huge, that not only are people becoming aware, they're inspired to act. And that's important. I want to go to the chat really quickly, because there was something very interesting here from Ben Finzel. White people have to be as upset about all of these offensive names and practices as Indigenous people are. It's not just up to the Indigenous community. We all have to be those unapologetic allies the panel is talking about. Call the bad behavior out, and don't let folks get away with saying it's not that bad. Simon, your thoughts?
Oh no, I love that. I love that comment, because a part of what we all do, whether you're journalists or an educator in public relations, as Indigenous people, we try to, like, especially for example, the name Brave, right? It doesn't stop at the tomahawk chop. Just because Brave isn't a racial slur doesn't make mascots, Indian mascots, any better. They dehumanize Indigenous people. They commodify Indigenous people. In 2005, the American Psychological Association came out and said we need to abolish all mascots because they have been clinically proven to harm the mental health and stability of children. So when we're talking about mascots, we're not talking about politically correct. We're talking about the mental health and stability of our children, who are already susceptible to depression, to substance abuse, the intergenerational trauma. So what we're doing is we're trying to protect them from these violent terms, these violent actions, and that's what they do. I mean, it's really, I remember really quickly, I know we're running out of time, back when the Chicago Blackhawks won in Chicago, there was a massive text that went around to everybody, and they were, if you're Indigenous, stay inside. And we're the last race of people that can go into a sports bar and piss off everybody there, whether they're Black, white, Asian, Latino, just because we're Indigenous. They think we're gonna go in there and ruin their party. So we don't even have to go wearing the jersey of the opposing team. That's why these mascots have to go. And again, Chiefs isn't a racial slur, Braves isn't a racial slur, but it's still the dehumanization and commodification of Indigenous people, which enables racist behavior.
Brandon, you have twin 9-year-old daughters.
Yeah.
How do you frame this discussion for them?
It actually, it comes up quite a bit. And I agree with Simon. It's where I grew up is a predominantly Cherokee population, small town of 3,000 people. My high school mascot was an Indian. And it was always, for a lot of folks there, it wasn't an issue, because when you said Stillwell Indians, there was literally a school full of what were Stillwell Indians. But the fact remains that it does create that caricature that, you know, there was a logo somewhere, and for folks that weren't from Stillwell, it became a point of, I attended basketball games where there were, racist things hurled at us simply because they thought, well, they call themselves Indians, so we can do whatever we want. We can do tomahawk chops. We can pretend we have a feather behind our head and make calls and things like that. So, I mean, for me personally, if my high school changed their mascot, I wouldn't care. My university did. We were originally the Red Men. They changed it to Riverhawks. I didn't have a problem with it. My daughters go to a school where their mascot's a Spartan. So I'm kind of like, hey, if, some soldiers want to show up that and be upset about that, some Spartans, I'll, change it. But the thing with my daughters, and they don't understand, and I explain to them daily, weekly, is they need to be proud of what they are, and don't ever let anybody make you feel ashamed of what you are. They've asked questions recently watching the news with the Braves win and the Chiefs win a few years, and they see things on the news and they go, why is that a problem? Why? And I explain it to them and I say, it's derogatory. It's a myth. You can drive anywhere in the world and see a population of Native Americans, and unless it's a ceremonial thing, you won't see these regalia or the the headdresses, the tomahawks, the loincloths, all these things that people walk around with that idea in their head that if they drive onto a reservation, they're going to see. I think a lot of people are shocked when they don't see that, and that bothers me, because I mean, that's not our reality. It's part of our culture. Parts of it are for different, but it's different wherever you go. So to just say all natives wear headdresses, all natives have some tomahawk stash somewhere that they break out in times of trouble, it's a ridiculous concept, and it just makes me really sad that I have to explain it to my children that's not a reality, and it should upset them. So I mean, it's a tough one.
Brandon, and I know we're out of time, but don't be ashamed of who you are. What a powerful message and legacy for your daughters. Thank you for sharing that with us, and thank all of our panelists for this brilliant, powerful discussion. Angela, Simon, Randiel, Brandon, thank you for being a part of this very special event, and thank you so much for sharing.
Happy to be here.
And we're about to make some news, folks. We are going to have a big announcement from Candace Himana. So Candace, if you would join me on camera and come off of mute. It's an honor and privilege to have you here on this very, very special night for this very, very special announcement. So I'm going to go off camera and go on mute, and please, Candace, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Catherine. Nakwang talongba na Candace Hamana Yanmatsiwa na Hanang Mungwa na Mungkangna Sino. Hi, everybody. My name is Candace Hamana. I'm Hopi. I'm from the Badger Clan, and I'm from the village of Monkopi. I want to thank everybody for joining this special panel session tonight. I especially want to give gratitude to the Museum of PR, Shelley, Barry, Jenny, Catherine for moderating, and all of the other panelists who have joined us this evening. I'm really excited, and I'm happy to announce that today, November 11th, we are formally launching the very first Indigenous Peoples Public Relations Association. And I believe we'll have Jenny load the logo for us. This has been a long time coming, and it will help connect American Indian and Alaska Native communications professionals across Indian country. The board members include myself, the owner of Badger PR, Colin Price, who is a panelist this evening, who is the owner of B Team Strategies. Taya Enos, who is the former marketing manager for the Gila River Indian Casinos, and Melody Lewis, who is the owner of Indigenous Community Collaborative. We are going to be guided by an advisory committee that includes Mark Trahant, the editor of Indian Country Today, Ricky McCarroll, the owner of Nuna Consulting, and April Tinhorn, the owner of Tinhorn Consulting. This is all coming together very organically, and I am anticipating that as our Indigenous communications professionals learn about the association, that we will continue to grow and get this organization off of the ground. Through IPPRA, we want to be able to offer member benefits that include access to online webinars and trainings where we can break down case studies and share best practices, provide and curate online certification programs that interweave tribal stakeholder relations and traditional PR methods, strategies, tactics, and tools. Host an annual PR conference, which Colin Price has already done. He hosted the very first Indigenous PR conference back in 2019. So it was very natural fit that he comes on board, and he will definitely be heading that up so that we can have an annual conference for Indigenous PR practitioners. And finally, and most importantly, we want to work with the corporate partners and colleges and universities across the country, especially those that have large American Indian and Alaska Native student populations, to identify and mentor the next generation of Indigenous communications professionals. We hope to develop highly qualified, highly motivated, highly energetic individuals that would, create a pool of candidates for internship opportunities, help them explore career paths that are part of tribal communications, and job placement with any corporate partners that come on board. So we're really excited to be able to bring this association to fruition. It is long overdue, and we've talked about it all in our own professional circles. And I'm excited that we have some dedicated folks who want to come together and collaborate and make it happen for our community. It is time that we make our presence known, and corporations and organizations across the country will soon hear from our collective Indigenous voices. And we have a lot to say. It is our time, and I'm very humbled to be a part of this. It's an exciting launch for us as Indigenous PR communications practitioners. And I'm just happy to make that announcement here. When we spoke with Shelley and Barry about sharing this news, they were gracious to give us this opportunity. And what better way to acknowledge that and celebrate this during the Native American Heritage Month, and among all the best colleagues and PR practitioners and journalism professionals that we have here today. So that is the announcement. Catherine, thank you.
Candace, thank you for your vision, your leadership, and as you said, this is long overdue, and you are making it happen. So bravo, kudos to you, and thank you. Thank you so much. Why don't you stay on with me? And I'm going to ask our second group of panelists to come off of mute and come on camera, and that would be Colin, yourself, of course, Janie, and the other Catherine this evening, Catherine Pennington. Welcome, welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. I'd like to begin the same way we began the last panel. If you would kindly introduce yourselves and tell us something that we can't find on your bio. Candace, we'll start with you.
Okay, great. Yes, I'm Candace Hamana. Something that you may not know about me is that I seem to have fell into a time capsule last year during the coronavirus, as I have started collecting vinyl records and roller skating.
Wow, that is impressive, that roller skating bit. Oh, thank you so much for sharing.
Sure,
Catherine.
no problem.
Yeah, Catherine.
Well, I'm feeling woefully inadequate in my COVID hobbies. Now that Candace has shared that, I don't have anything quite that exciting, but yeah, I guess something about me. So my name's Catherine Pennington, and I am joining you today from British Columbia, Canada. And I think I'm the only Canadian on the panel. And I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territory of the Lheidli T'enneh people. And I guess something about me, I'm a citizen of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, and I'm originally from a small community of 500 people. And actually it snowed 2 centimeters in that community. I just been receiving phone calls and text messages all day about that. So something about me, thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for being here. Colin.
Hello, everybody. My name is Colin Price, and my bio is short, but one thing that I'm super proud of and I'm passionate about is sports. I'm a former college football player, and now I spend my free time coaching my 3rd and 4th grade sons and watching them play youth sports, which is pretty sweet. So that's me.
Outstanding. Janie.
Hi, I was trying to think of something, and I'm probably, well, yeah, I guess I could say this. I'm a sommelier in training. I've been told by many people I can taste a lot of things, and my sense of smell is pretty on point, so I need to go to school for it.
Now that's a school I would like to check out. Personally, that is right up my alley. But we're here to talk about the future. So let's pivot a moment. And I apologize for the noise in the background. Real time, my apologies. We're here to talk about the future, and I'd like to start with what I think is a little bit perplexing, and I'm hoping we can have some dialogue around it. There doesn't seem to be a lot of Indigenous people in the public relations profession. So why do you think that is, and what do you think we can do about it? And I know Candace has already taken a bold step with her organization. So why don't we start with Candace on this one?
Thank you, Catherine. So I feel like one of the main reasons why there may not be as much representation out within the communications field with other businesses is because I feel like a lot of our students are actually using those same types of skills, the communication skills, writing, but they may be using them in other ways that are more business related or in other industries. So I think that with the formation of the association, I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to identify and pick out those students that are out there and that really desire and want to learn about how to be a better communications practitioner and be the bridge to help them find job placement within businesses and corporations across the country, as well as be the best communications professionals that they can for their tribal communities. because that is one thing that I know myself as my own business owner, being able to work for my own tribe is gives me a sense of pride that I really can't find anywhere else. And a lot of the other practitioners that I know have also returned to their own communities and are using their talents and their skills to help their own tribal governments. And so I think that there are lessons to learn in how we can identify and get those folks to, step into a larger role with some stakeholder relations work within other businesses.
That's great. Thank you. Janie, same question.
Hi, so I'm from the Navajo Nation originally, and my path to what I do now is definitely not what I went to school for in a way. And I think that what Candace and Mark and a lot of folks were saying was that given our populations, and I know this was true when I worked in academia, everyone's trying to vie for Native students to their profession. And there was a growth of how we got Native lawyers, that when we didn't have Native lawyers in the 60s and 70s as abundant as we do now. And it took a lot of work from Native and non-Native partners and allies to make that happen. And so, for example, if there's companies, again, with this new great program that Candace has launched, would be a wonderful avenue for recruitment and retention, because there's a lot of folks vying for Native people in different sectors because we're so needed and there's not enough of our voices in many disciplines. And so I think for me, even coming into the PR world, sort of PR comms and marketing, I didn't really get into this section until I started working on campaigns and social advocacy issues, because I saw the breadth and the wide variety. Now I look back like at the ASU Walter Cronkite School, and I'm like, oh, I should have done that when I was an undergraduate. But I think that that's a big piece, is that relationship for building those pathways, and honestly for our allies, non-Native, to hire us and to listen to us. Because that's what I find, for example, in my field, and I'll talk about that, is the hardest part when you have a lot of non-Native people, mostly white people, that are running the show. They have no knowledge of Indigenous communities. And again, that's how we get left out. So I think like putting trust and in Indigenous people to lead and to listen and is a really great start.
User error. Catherine, same question.
Yeah, thanks. I was really identifying with what Janie was speaking about. And I think from a personal perspective, like I didn't even know that there was career options in this thing called public relations or public affairs. I grew up in a really small place, right? 500 people. And so jobs that were available in that place and space were not something that would have lent itself into this kind of work. So I started my career in social work, working in Indigenous communities and social work, and was recruited to come into this role and into this type of work. And I just would have never even knew that it was an option. So when I think about how do we change it, there's a great saying that I take from education, from my years in education, and that is that you can't be what you can't see. And so I think it's vital that we create platforms where Indigenous peoples can see themselves in those roles, and then it creates an opportunity. But if you can't see it, so I'm really excited by the announcement that Candace has made, because I do think that this is a real opportunity to continue to highlight Indigenous peoples in these roles, which then by nature creates more of an interest. So I think that's what I would have to share with that.
Colin, your thoughts?
Yeah, first, that's a really good question. I think that there's a couple different things that can go into why we don't see as many. Number one, I think that some people aren't familiar with the actual what PR is as we define it. I came into PR working for my tribe, never worked in PR. I didn't know what that was. And so you're just thrown into the world of communications and PR, and you got to learn it. And so once, I would say a couple of years into that, you start getting the groove. And then I kind of, the light bulb went off that this isn't that hard. I know we're all skilled, super highly skilled and professional, but it's nothing that someone else can't do. And so once I started kind of realizing that, I always try to give people the opportunity to enter the field. In our culture in Ho Chunk, the women defer to the men to speak, and so we've seen some cultural barriers to why women aren't in the role of the public relations officer. And so I think that's something too that most of us could relate to, is the cultural nuances that we work within our own tribes or organizations that we have to deal with and manage and kind of figure out. So, my PR specialist who worked for me, I was always trying to put her in the front of the show and give her the shine, and kind of elevate and allow her to be the rock star that she was, despite the role that she plays culturally within our tribe. And so I think that's kind of something that could be at play as well. But overall, I think we're starting to see more of that, and I'm excited because there's some really awesome, talented folks coming up behind. And again, I always just try to give them opportunities, let them experience it, and let them see that they got the chops to do it and can really kick some butt.
I love that. And to Catherine's point, you have to see it to be it. When we look around, it's more prevalent than ever before. Cabinet Secretary, right? Steph Helen, Nobel Laureate, Joy Harjo. When I was growing up, it was Elizabeth Marie Tallchief, known professionally as Maria Tallchief, the first prima ballerina of the United States, married to George Balanchine. I mean, she was my hero. I truly believe there wouldn't be a Misty Copeland, as amazing as she is, had there not been a Maria Tallchief. So why is that so important, do you think? And now that we're starting to get traction, what's next? And I'll start with Janie this time.
Sure. So in the context of the PR world and seeing someone like Deb Holland, and that's easy for me because I do work in that area, but one, as an individual Indigenous person, of course, that sense of pride and all of those wonderful feelings that come when anytime we see her on TV. The moment I remember walking in an airport and the first time she was giving her major speech, and it was on CNN or something, and I was like, wow, look at that. And it took this long to have people like that. I mean, we had sporadic folks here and there, and then we have Indian Country Today that is consistent and every day. So we get to see this. It's the growth and the time and effort that Native people have put into it. And so what's next, I think, is only more, because for sessions like this is the first time this group has had a talk like this, and now it will be an annual thing, I'm assuming. And it will be a wonderful thing because you guys are educating a whole bunch of new people that may have not met Native people or maybe been to tribal communities. So this is that breadth of growth and how we build that allyship. And that's what I do in my work constantly, because I get a sense of the people that want to help, that want to know, but then we have to be careful in how we bring them in, to be honest, because we don't want stereotypes and myths to be perpetuated, but we also don't want to get tired out by just educating all the time. And we have that in every field where we're asked to represent like all of the 550 plus tribes, and we can't just be constantly educating. So I would also take that upon in this growth in the future of building relationships and getting more people into the field and more people on TV, radio, but wherever branch of PR comms and marketing goes, is they also have to do the work and educate themselves. Take Simon's class. I like I like how he's like, we're all different voices, right? Mark's voice, all of us have different ways of communicating. And I like Simon because he gets feisty and like riles people up in that truth and that brutal truth. And then there's other voices who have a different way of, like Angela, I just love the way that she delivers and so supportive in the way that she brings her voice as a reporter journalist. And so I think that that's the beauty of it, is growth, listen, learn, don't have us do all the educating all the time, and definitely pitch in, find out how you can contribute to really say, hey, I'm gonna contribute some time this year to help Candace and the growth, and maybe mentor some Native students in the journalism school at X, Y, or Z. Make a real commitment.
I love that. Make a commitment. Colin, what's next?
Oh boy, what's next? Nothing but good stuff. I think we're seeing it. I think so. I know most of the folks in the panel by way of our professional interactions. I think what's next is we continue to allow one another to grow. Something that I've seen in other professions, in law enforcement, there is this constant climb to the top, and everyone's climb was dependent on pushing someone down. And I thought that was just toxic, and that can't be the way to operate. And what I think is really refreshing with this group and this field is that there's so much to go around. The business owners in the group, you rely on clients, and when I get something that is out of my scope, I'm always happy to refer it. I think that we continue to lift one another up, allow other people to have opportunities they may not have heard about. And so I'm always trying to support, because I think just giving back and doing better is always a good thing. So, what's next is our allies we talked about earlier, is the executives in corporate America reaching up and allowing internship opportunities. It's going to where our tribal communities are. So when it comes from a recruitment standpoint, go to the tribal colleges. Like, that's a really weird concept for people, but there are indigenous students there, and so go check it out. Go ask a question, go see. And I think we're starting to see a little bit more of that. But overall, I'm super excited. I think, like I said before, there's just a giant pool of talent, and I'm always trying to push them forward to the front and give them the opportunity that they deserve. And when they get it, that's all they need. And so more of that.
Opportunity. It's all about opportunity, isn't it? Catherine, same question.
Yeah, I was really kind of struck by a number of things that the panel has said here on this particular topic. And I think in the construct of how important it is to have people in visible positions, I was thinking about my own experience when I've seen Canadian Indigenous people who have, been in the space of media, television, who've been in the space of being a member of parliament here in the Canadian system, or who have been very successful in sharing a message. And then just by nature, our attention really focuses, and we become much more aware of the opportunities that could in fact be for us. But as Colin was speaking, I was thinking, in industry, which is of course where I work, I'm no longer a direct social worker, but I do work within that space, within industry in many ways, many of the same skills. It occurred to me that when we talk to communities, groups, and organizations about opportunities in the space, it's not often about work in public affairs or public relations. It's usually about opportunities around engineering, science, technology. And when I worked in education and social work, it was really focused on opportunities in those sectors. But did I ever really sit down and think about what about an opportunity in the space of communications? And I really haven't. And so, Candace, this really lends why this organization is so important, because it maybe will help us to also then tell the story in a way that is accessible, right? And I think that that's one of the modern technologies that we can really rely on, is social media and other digital forums, to tell the story, to generate an interest, to then help to bring more people into these spaces. So that's what stands out.
Yes, indeed. Candace, your thoughts?
So I really like this question because as a communications professional, working in tribal relations, tribal government, public affairs, tribal liaison type work, you really understand that all tribes are very unique and they all have a different amount that they're able to scale, and resources can be limited for some tribes. So I think that the pandemic really amplified the need to have good crisis communications strategies. And I believe that that really put a spotlight on that need. So moving forward, I think it's identifying those, again, the Indigenous communication practitioners, but also going a little bit farther into the disciplines of communications. It's not, contrary to what some of our younger students believe, or students in general, it's beyond just social media, right? It's beyond just being able to put content on Facebook. You actually have to get down into strategic communications. You embody certain roles, like Colin was talking about, whether you could be working in emergency management for a tribal government. And so you're wearing several hats as a media relations contact, as a public information officer, and as a liaison to, the tribal leadership. So those are very specific and unique roles. They require a lot of trust, trust and skills and interpersonal communications. And so I feel that that's really what's next for us, is to be able to really tap into just having more depth for our toolkits as tribal communicators. And then as far as seeing individuals like Secretary Deb Haaland, I mean, we need to elect more women we need to elect more women to offices. We need to have more women, more Indigenous professionals in the C-suite as well. They're very valuable skills that we bring to the table. And I feel compelled to share a story, because this is something that actually spurred the whole reason why I started my own Badger PR. I was working for a utility company, and they had several tribal stakeholders that they had to communicate with, and were responsible to making sure that they were informed on different strategies that they were working through as a utility. One day they had a public meeting, and these tribal leaders were invited to come and present their sort of rebuttal or their argument for why the preemptive closure of the Navajo generating station shouldn't happen. Right. So you had this leader of a tribal company stand before the board of directors of this utility company. And he was telling a story, and he was getting ready to present them a piece of corn and Hopi. And there is a lot of significance in corn. And this tribal leader was coming to present the board of directors with this corn, and it was a symbol of the willingness to work together to try and find some middle ground. Is a very contentious, it was around a very contentious issue of water, water in the desert, right? That's just so significant. So it was very sad that when the tribal leader left, the board members, a couple of the board members had thought that this tribal leader was presenting them with something that looked like a bomb. And so from that day forward, they decided that if they were going to have these public meetings, that they were going to have a security detail on hand, because they just could not anticipate, what they could expect from a tribal leader. And that was my tribe. That was, it was a tribal leader from my tribe that was presenting that to the board of directors. And I walked out of that meeting, and probably within that week, I decided to leave that company and start my own business. And so I feel like there's a lesson in that, as well as, tribal stakeholder relations is just not a box that gets checked from all of these organizations, from an Enbridge to any other utility company, any other corporation, an oil corporation, energy, anything that extracts from the economy and from the resources of Indigenous communities. The tribal stakeholder relations is just not a box to check. And I feel like that's how we need to bridge this gap. That's how we need to educate these companies and these businesses about the cultural sensitivities and the cultural significance of how tribal leaders and tribal governments do business. And so I've been compelled to share that story for so long. It's been a couple of years, and I've carried it with me, and it's been very heavy. And so I'm being able to lift that off of my chest today. But I feel like there's a lot of lessons that are learned in that. Tribal stakeholder relations is not a box that you check, and corporations and individual practitioners, we need to be brave, and we need to understand that stepping into those roles, can sometimes feel like you're putting a target on your back, but the work is too important. The work is too important, and the conversations are too important to ignore. So.
Candace, yes, indeed, it is too important. And thank you for sharing that story and having the courage to share that story. We hear over and over the CCO role is the Chief Courage Officer, and you certainly exemplified that. So thank you. You also make an interesting point that, when the job becomes this personal, it's not just what you do, it's part of you, that's who you are. Representing a tribe is very different than representing a client. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how that feels to you. And I'll start with Catherine.
Yeah, I just was really moved by Candace's story, and I really honor that she's been holding that and then shared that with us. So I just want to raise my hands to you and say thank you. That's a gesture that we make here on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada. And so the raising of the hands is the recognition and the honor. So thank you for that. Yeah, it also kind of stood out for me a lot, because I think about the team that I lead. So 60% of the team that I lead is Indigenous. And that has been a transformative change in the organization that I work in over the last 13 years. When I first started, there was really a small handful of us that were Indigenous. And in Canada, we have 3 distinct Indigenous groups. So it's Métis, Inuit, and First Nation. And there's a really, really small group of us within this corporation. And that's grown transformatively. In fact, part of our larger public affairs team, which includes external relations, government relations, communications, et cetera, is, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20%. And that's really changed the way that we communicate with nations, because that drives the relationships first. And I think about what Candace is saying, that has transformatively changed the way that we engage with communities, and more importantly, how communities engage with us. So I think there was a time when we were really focused on pushing out information, and that's not engagement, that's not consultation, that's not relationships. And so this has been a big learning curve for us because, you know, I do sit here tonight representing corporate Canada. I really get that. But I have also worked directly for the nations in which my family is from. So Beardy's and Okanagan First Nation for my father, the Métis Nation also for my family. I have worked within Métis Nation, British Columbia, so I can appreciate that when you're communicating, it is deeply personal. I can tell you for everyone that works on the team that I work on that is Indigenous, this is deeply personal. We take it really personally. And so I recognize that in the space that I represent, energy is really controversial, but we take it personally because we do try with everything that we have to do the best that we can. And I think that that is kind of where I come from in the context of working deeply with communities. And we're not always going to agree, but we can certainly always communicate effectively through kindness and compassion and through listening.
Yes, indeed. Colin.
Let's see. So how it feels, I think it's amazing. It's a really unique perspective, being Native and working for your tribe or a client and bring that perspective to them. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Madison, Wisconsin, or as we Ho-Chunks call it, Dayjope, which means 4 lakes. And this is a really cool case study of public relations that we've built, laid the groundwork for over probably the last 10 years. And to see not selfishly my work, but the work of others continue to be visible in this city is amazing. You know, we talked about land acknowledgements earlier, and now, you know, that's starting to be not good enough, which I agree. But what we did do is not stop there, and we continue to be a voice at the table for everything going on around the city, whether that's city politics or the University of Wisconsin. And so what we've seen just last week, we've seen a canoe that's was at the bottom of Lake Mendota for thousands of years was brought up. So my ancestors' canoe is something super cool to see. We saw the Ho-Chunk Nation flag raised on campus for the first time ever last week on the iconic Bascom Hill. And the sense of pride that I have in our community is really cool. And Saturday we're going to a Badger game. It's Ho-Chunk Nation Plaza. And so seeing that in the work and the commitment, not just by the tribe and the PR professionals, but it's the willingness from the community, the allies that we talked about earlier, that want to be an ally, that want to help, that want to learn and listen and not dictate to the tribe, this is what we're going to do. It's always asking and getting input. And from there, you see tremendous strides. And so I try to bring that energy and sense of pride to all the clients and to elevate the tribal communities that I work with and the companies. So that's pretty sweet. So, and you guys should come to Madison too, by the way. It's awesome.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Angela, I'm sorry, Janie, rather. I think you're going to have the last word on this one.
Sure. Well, I appreciate Candace getting real because I was waiting for that. I know we got real in the last panel too, but that is such the truth. No matter what discipline or project or initiative you're working on, is that relationship can't just be one way. And I'm hopefully said that enough times, but like in our world, for example, if we're trying to build a pipeline, we have to pay people. We can't do this stuff for free, and we have to go where the people are. That's one thing. I can give you one example. When you're doing any kind of campaign, political or issue, you need to be on tribal lands to do it. You need to engage in those comms, and there are people who can do that for you. And you're not going to know how to reach people. So, for example, Navajo Nation radio is huge. A lot of people don't remember that, and they have to do radio language in Navajo and in English to get, because that's like the main source of news for a lot of folks in that area. And you have to understand little nuances, like a certain part of northeastern Arizona is not going to get Arizona news. They're going to get New Mexico news. And so those things like that are really helpful when you're building that pipeline and hiring locally and hiring indigenous. And how we're doing that with organizers just in general, and we're starting at the high schools. We're being present, showing people what is comms. We may not say comms marketing in a lot of those perspectives, but it's organizing, it's telling your story, it's advocating for something you care about, and how do you make change around that? Do you want to maybe help write a letter to the editor? We'll help you do that. Do you want to do something on social media? Do you want to publicly speak, or do you want to do something smaller? So it's all of these ways that people in this field and these businesses that the folks are talking to now can do those type of things. And so I think that's what gets me excited about the work that I do. Yes, it's very personal because it's my community and I don't want them to get cheated. I don't want them to get schemed. I want to be there to be an advocate and make sure they get right in what's due to them, but also, help the other side understand, and hopefully we can have a better relationship coming out of this, or whatever it is that we're getting into, to make positive change in whatever field we're in. So I think that that's really important on getting the real and putting your money where your mouth is. Because I have so many groups who say, oh, indigenous this, the native that, so many times, but you know what? They don't invest. They don't put their money where their mouth is. They don't come out. And I think that's a really big tier that we can get over with groups like Candace and Colin and Mark and so many other groups, to be able to invest in indigenous communities and do it more than one time a year. Do it every day. And so I think it's being consistent, being solid, and that's how we push these relationships forward. So, yeah.
Well, being consistent and solid and putting your money where your mouth is something that each of our panelists does each and every day. And we thank you for it. How about a virtual Zoom round of applause for all of these amazing professionals we've had the pleasure of hearing from this evening. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to turn the program over to the amazing Kathy Baird. Kathy?
Hi, can you hear me and see me okay?
We can. You look and sound beautiful.
How matako yape chante washte nape chiyuza pe kisto. Good evening, relatives. I greet you with a good heart. It is a good evening to be Indigenous, and shakole to any Oneida relatives who are in the house. Really appreciate you inviting me to this discussion. As I said, I'm Kathy Baird. I'm Sichangu Lakota. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Rosebud Lakota tribe in South Dakota, and I'm also descended from the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. And I work at Nike as a Senior Director of Engagement and Advocacy in our global communications teams. And I really have an incredible job. I get to support Nike's purpose communications efforts, including working on N7 with our beloved Sam McCracken, who I know is listening in tonight. And we get to work to bring visibility to our community, both within our community, but one of the areas we're really focused on is taking our community to the mainstream, which is really important for us to garner that visibility and leveraging the power of Nike to be able to get us there. I also get to co-chair Nike's Native American Network. And then in my spare time, I work across a variety of nonprofits that are in and out of Indian country. I serve as a strategic advisor and comms counselor. If you're in comms, you know all your friends who are not in comms are calling you regularly. And one of those organizations that I do get to work with is Illuminative, who I think is making great impact in our community right now. Tonight I'm in Portland, Oregon, which is where I reside for my job. And Portland is located in part on top of the Tualatin Kalapia village of Chakipi. Chakipi means place of the beaver, and Nike's world headquarters is actually located in Beaverton, Oregon. But the Tualatin Kalapia signed a Willamette Valley Treaty in 1855 and were then forcibly removed to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation. I'm a new resident of Oregon, and it is important for me to learn about the land that I'm on. I know a lot about where I come from, but I also don't know Indian country across all of Indian country. And I think to Jamie's point on education, it's really important. You know, we are seen as people who tend to be the expert on all things Indian, and I am not that person. So I know it's a lot of labor for us to take on, and I'm respectful to just understanding where I am, where my feet are, and what I need to know about that, the history of that area. And appreciate, I think I missed the earlier discussion on what land acknowledgements, how land acknowledgements are taking off. And I know they are at Nike. We're working to make that happen. But also it is just a starting point. It is just a piece of education that then should lead and be a bridge to a larger conversation about how we respect Indigenous peoples, not just the past, but in the present and the future. I really appreciate this moment. This is a great moment for Native Americans in public relations. And honestly, it's the first of my kind in my experience. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've been in this profession, and I haven't had an organized effort like this. So I'm really grateful that this was pulled together and that I met Shelley and team. So thank you again. A lot of times I'm the only Indigenous communicator in a room, and sometimes I'm the only Indigenous team member in a room. That is a large part of my career. I've worked in Washington, D.C. for a large extent until I moved to Oregon. And I think that just aspect of having to be the educator is a big part of what I'm asked to do. And there are times that I feel like it's my responsibility, and there are other times where I do believe it is a lot of labor. But I do very much lean into my Indigenous values to help me through that, which I've learned through my family, which is prayer, respect for others, respect for the land, compassion, humility. I think the kind of values that I was taught as I grew up provide me with unique gifts in how I can approach my profession in communications and in the workplace. And I find that our values are really critical to the workplace today in terms of, I don't know, many of the spaces we're probably all in and having to solve problems and resolve conflicts, all of which are an innate nature of a communicator. Thank you to Mark for your keynote, Mark Trehant. What a legend, and what a great media vehicle and beyond you've been able to provide Indian people with. Thank you so much for that. And also special thank you to Candace for leading the needed effort on the Indigenous Communicators Association. I hope you'll call me. I want to be involved and I want to help. And also the panelists on the myths and representation of Indigenous people, and then the conversation that was just had on the future. I think it's really important for us to talk about the future because we have to see ourselves in these professions. And I did not when I was growing up. I didn't have an Indigenous communicator that was like in my world, or at least I didn't think I had one that was in my world who was going to teach me or show me that it was possible. But we need these roles of visible leadership in and out of Indian country so that our students and young people know what's possible for them. This is something that we talk about all the time with N7, just what our responsibility is to our youth, encouraging movement and well-being, being of service to our community, and then being able to deliver a beacon of hope, because it's really important today for our young people to see themselves, period. But they also need to see themselves in these professions and in these careers. And for us in N7, it's in sport, but it's also beyond sport. And for me, after 15 years of working on the agency side in PR agencies, advertising agencies, I took a leap of faith. And 2 years ago, I joined Nike. And in large part, I did that because of N7, because I knew there was an Indigenous population there. And I also felt I could serve my community. And it's been a privilege for me to do that, and also drive representation, which is a really important thing that we're trying to do within Nike in communications and beyond. I also really love the word bridge that Candace used. It really struck me that's like the core of our profession. We're professional bridge builders. We are taking this complex information and we're translating it for others to understand. We're holders of empathy and advocacy. We're having to work to understand how people might perceive or react to something, a campaign, a logo, a message. We have to use our words and our language and our images to make sure that our efforts aren't misunderstood. And we also have some pretty tough moments that require courage, which was a topic that was just talked about right now. All communicators have probably been in a major crisis or a campaign that has like fallen right before your eyes. I have been there. I've been on the floor. I've been rocked several times in my professional experience from a communications assignment. And the profession makes you tough, but I also believe it requires you to be tough to start with. And then lastly, as Indigenous people, we're innate storytellers. As an Indigenous woman, everything that I know has been taught to me through story. It's how I learn. I do read and I do, I did go to school, but honestly, it's been through the language, the words, the messages, the family experiences that I've learned how to be a communicator. My family is very long-winded and they're storytellers, and they will keep and hold you to those stories for hours and hours. And there, in essence, is the core of who we are as communicators. I'll close with a quick story and then I'll open it up for some questions, because I know there are a couple that are coming in, and please continue to put the questions in the Q&A feature. But this was struck by Colin, who was just talking about the flag of the Ho-Chunk Nation a couple years ago. when I joined Nike, we had this idea about raising our flags of tribal nations at the entrance to the Nike headquarters. And I'll just tell you at Nike, that headquarters, it's really large. It's just acres and acres of land. It's beautiful, it's green. And you drive down this long roadway, you know, as you get to the entrance to campus, and there are these flags out there. And on the side of the road as you're driving, the flags represent all the various nations that Nike is doing business with. And so you know, one of my friends in the Native American network is like, gosh, it would be so cool if we could like just put our own flags up there. And so, you know, I'm new, and, you know, when you're new, you get to ask any question you want. So I go to, you know, the powers that be, and I say, hey, we have this idea. We want to raise our flags at the entrance to campus. And the immediate reaction was like, no, we don't take those flags down. Those flags are there for a reason. So I'm like, okay, being the new person, I'm going to like push a little bit. I'm going to ask someone else. I'm going to see how we can get this done. So I went to a couple of other folks, and I found a way to get in, and I finally found someone who said yes. And then I had to take that back and take that back. And so in 2019, we had 19 flags that we raised on campus representing Indigenous nations, both from teammates at Nike, as well as some of the partners that we do work with in N7. And it was a moment for all of us to feel there is no promotion I've ever had, no job offer, no recognition in the workplace I've had that has given me the feeling of being seen like that moment did for me, especially at a large company like Nike, especially where we are only 3% of the US population. And at Nike, we're even smaller than that. Last year was COVID, so we didn't ask, but just this year, last Friday, we were able to have that same ceremony again, and it's grown, and we have more presence than we did before. And we also do song, and we smudge, and we celebrate each other. And we cry and we laugh, and it is, you know, coming out of COVID right now, and I know we're still in COVID. It really is amazing to experience those things in the workplace. And so as an Indigenous communicator, you know, the courage to ask, the courage to challenge, you know, the desire for our community to be seen, I carry all those things with me. And if I do it with respect and humility, oftentimes the answer for me is yes. So just wanted to share that story because Colin really inspired that when he was talking about his experience. So that is my my talk and my closing remarks for you all. I mean, what a great moment for everyone to be together and celebrate communications in Indian country. So now I think my job is to moderate some questions that are coming in. I see one from Denise, and I think I would just ask, you know, whoever wants to answer this, just turn your camera back on. But with regards to storytelling, how do you adapt your storytelling abilities for audiences where money, power, and ego are values, and sometimes at odds with Indigenous values of community and humility?
I can take that on real quickly as an example, because I'm going to be giving our start donor calls tomorrow morning. And so I have to make money. And it's asking for those big check numbers and sponsorship because I know our value, I know our worth. And I think that's a really good thing to know who you are, your story, and the work that I do in organizing. The foundation is the people, their stories, and what they did to do, you know, what they do in order to do their work, and to fund that work is critical. Without them, Arizona would not have won the elections we did, which is Native voters. Native voters are powerful. The messaging about protecting voting rights in general, you know, the significance of the Native American voting bloc in Arizona and all across the country is critical. But being able to tell those critical stories of how, what, when, where, and what people have to go through is really important, and people want to see that work. And so I know when I talk to donors or sponsors that know us, they know what we do, which is great. For those that don't, obviously we have to tell the stories and make the case and build that partnership and ally. But I know some people, some tribes are really about that humbleness, but I think when you're in PR and comms, some of that's got to be put to the side and finding that balance, because that's your job, is you have to advocate for people, you have to speak up, and otherwise, you know, I think we're also code switchers and talkers, so we figure out the strategies and how we do that really well.
That was great. Yeah, the code switching is like, it is a separate skill unique in and of itself, especially when you work in and out of Indian country, you have to move fluidly. And I know exactly what you mean. For Candace, I saw Shelley dropped some questions in chat as well too. Could you tell us about the plans for your organization in the first 3 months?
Hi, yes, thank you. So, I think what we'll be doing in the first 3 months is really reaching out and getting other individuals who may just be learning about the organization, getting them on board and seeing how they want to contribute to the association. Obviously, we're going to also be needing some seed money for the organization to get it up and get it going. So fundraising, seed money through various partnerships, corporations, and then building out the programs for memberships and really identifying how we can bring added value to the members as they come on board. So I'm looking forward to working with the board members and getting input from our advisory committee members as how we can create a solid plan to move the association forward.
That's great, thank you. And do you mind answering, someone had asked, trying to tie to the national PR organizations like PRSA, and I know you answered this in chat, but if you don't mind just telling everyone in case they didn't read.
Yes, thank you. I am a former PRSA member, and I appreciate all of the services and benefits that I received as a member of PRSA. However, I do know from talking with my other comms friends that there have been approaches made to PRSA as a national organization to carve out a chapter for Indigenous practitioners. And that suggestion was shot down by the national organization. So what we're doing really is taking the initiative to build something that is tailored to Indigenous communications. And I think we'll emulate some of the programs and have some of the benefits like online webinars and like lunch and learn type activities that we can join together virtually, but also again have that physical network face-to-face relationship building opportunity when Colin announces the next tribal PR conference. And so there have been attempts to work with a national organization like PRSA, but we're going to go out on our own and make a way for our practitioners and for the future communicators that are out there in the colleges and universities across the country.
Understood, thank you. And to Colin, do you work with large companies that are looking to build a bridge with Indigenous communities?
Yes, I don't know if that was a question, but yeah, I certainly do. And part of my kind of going back to the opportunity thing, I started, consulting. I just wanted someone to give me a chance. That's evolved to where
alert from Google Chrome.
I essentially get to pick my clients now, which is nice. And part of that, I guess, process and due diligence with them is having them understand that this isn't going to be superficial. This is going to be deep, and it's not a campaign. So that's one thing that I typically don't do are the campaigns, the kind of short burst of energy, because I think it's more effective if we can teach and educate and have them understand and play the long game. I think that's something that's been pretty effective, and it really requires buy-in from the leadership. So again, I try not to spend a lot of time selling people on it, because generally I found that people in leadership positions, they understand and want it and they'll pay for it. Whereas if you're having to explain and teach and tell people this is the benefits, it's generally a waste of time and effort. So yeah, the companies are pretty spectacular and have a good time. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yes, Randy.
I have something to add to that, is that what I've been seeing and getting requests from here in the state of Idaho is cultural training for not only the schools, but also for government entities that work with tribal governments. So that government to government consultation that has to happen between the tribes and, say, for example, BLM or the DOI. We actually been seeing a bigger need. I've been asked to do these cultural trainings, but again, you know, I think that's something that we should consider as professionals in the PR field, is that that's a need. What is cultural training? Identifying those priorities and being able to provide that to the school boards, to people that are wanting to understand what is a sovereign nation, what does it mean, treaty articles of the treaties. There's lots of questions that I feel like a lot of people don't really understand. And so again, I feel like it's been a big task on my shoulders lately, because a lot of people are very interested in including this whole land acknowledgement. That's included as well. I actually am going to be putting a land acknowledgement on the tribe's external website, because I've been getting so many requests from small businesses, from universities, and I can't keep up with them. So I'm just going to go ahead and drive them to our website so they can go ahead and copy and paste.
I really feel you on that. As I have the same experience. And it's almost like, we kind of jokingly talk at work, like, do we need to do like a 101 deck on who we are? It's called Indian 101 in slang, but it's like, there's so many just things about the community that are so important in order to tell this story, in order to explain why, the mascot, the significance of and the harm of mascots. It's like, you kind of need to back up and like drop some education too. So it's a lot of labor. I feel you 100% on that. Hey, Simon, how you doing?
Good, how are you? It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. A question for you. How can we hear more Indigenous news on NBC?
Oh, that's really difficult. I've been trying to work with that. I mean, it sucks. I mean, I'm the only, or just a few of us are in mainstream news. And, that means we're the minority in the voice when it comes to reporting on, Indian country. So I encourage people to look this up. There's NBC Black, there's NBC Asian America, and there's NBC Latino. So I asked the diversity crew up there at NBC why there's no NBC Native America or NBC Indigenous. And unfortunately, their response sucked. It was, you guys just don't have the numbers. And I mean, at no fault of our own, are we the smallest racial minority in our ancestral land? And we can't get that level, we can't get that platform at NBC. So we're working on it as often as possible. But what's even more important is not that these folks report on Indian country, but hire more Indigenous reporters and editors. The editors will get to choose the story, and reporters know how to use, like, Indigenous people know the language to use, right? We don't say colonist or settler, they invaded. You first have to invade before you can settle or colonize. And so unfortunately, in my case, they're like, that's great, Simon, that is a fact, but we're going to put you in the opinion section. So I write for the opinion section of NBC now, where I used to do breaking news. Because again, the myth, the American myth made narrative. So I think it's more about exposure, but pressure from within. So I'm trying all the time. Hopefully you'll get more news through NBC from an Indigenous lens as well. Thank you for that question.
Yes, appreciate you, friend, and all you do for the community.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark, good to see you too. We have a question on how important it is for the business community to learn about history, and it sounds like you have something in the works. You're on mute, my friend.
I swear I did not plant this question. This is one that's really teed up. So we're about to begin a major economic project. And as many of you know, there's a very complex business cycle going to start with environment, social governance, ESG investing. And we're using that as a framework to look at how corporations have been dealing with Indian country. And so much of this really came out of Standing Rock, when behind the scenes, there was really major negotiations going on with investors talking to companies about material risk and what kinds of things were being calculated and how do you measure, and those kinds of accounting questions that, except to a wonk, are not really the most interesting things, but I love this stuff. So we have a major grant from a foundation to begin this project next year. And one of the cool things about this, and it also, I think maybe unique, is the grant gives us money to partner with universities to contract for research. So in addition to our own reporting, we'll be doing some pretty major database research along the lines of how many natives serve on boards, how many serve in corporate officer roles, who has indigenous policies and how are they vetted by the boards. Those kinds of things will all be in this project. So I'm really excited about it. Thank you for that question. I also have just a quick story about MSNBC or NBC. Many, many years ago, I was a candidate to be editor-in-chief of NBC and went back for an interview. And it was funny because they planned on it for a one-day interview. And so I went for the one day. We hit it off. This was back when the Microsoft people were still involved. And they said, can you stay a couple more days? We really want to keep talking to you. And I said, sure, but I only packed for one day. So they said, well, go buy some clothes. This is New York. And so I got a kick. I bought what I called my NBC suit for several years that they paid for, but I didn't get the job.
Well, your job is so important today that I can't imagine what we'd be doing without you. So glad we have you.
Thanks.
I think we are at the close. Don't know if we have any other final questions, but thank you for letting me join. I know it was super last minute, but I really love being here with my fellow Indigenous communicators. And thank you to the Museum of Public Relations, which is really cool that they put this on. And I don't know if there's anyone else who will come up and say goodbye, but I will at least say goodbye to you all. I think a lot of people are dropping their names and info in chat. So I think any of us on this call would, we're here if you want to reach us on maybe LinkedIn, or we can drop emails in chat and contact information. And again, thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Shelley and team for inviting us to the table.
Of course, and thank you so much, Kathy, for coming on and for wrapping it all up and for having this fantastic Q&A with the show's participants. I've been sitting here, holding back tears, just so proud of the event that we were able to put together and all of the stories that we heard tonight and just all of the important things that we could take away from what everyone has shared here today. And indeed, it was an amazing program. And thank you to all who shared your stories and for joining us. This is recorded and will be shared on YouTube next week, hopefully. And we hope to see you all at the museum's event on November 30th, which is PR's Got Talent. It's the industry's first ever talent show over Zoom. And we welcome you all to register for free on prmuseum.org. Thank you again for joining us tonight and have a great rest of your evening. Connect with us on LinkedIn, follow all of these amazing panelists on social media, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Take care, everyone.